Hello and welcome to today's podcast titled The 5 Interesting Shapes of NFTs. My name is Alex Arenas, Director of Toys and Media Entertainment. With me today is my co-host, Kristen McLean, Executive Director of Client Development and our Industry Analyst in Books. Today's game plan is to quickly touch on the state of the market, explain what NFTs are, discuss the 5 interesting shapes of NFTs, and then end with some of the challenges and obstacles we see in the space. Our goal for today is to leave you with a better and broader understanding of the space and its impact in entertainment. But before we dig into this, let me remind everyone that we are recording this in July 2022, and the market is always quickly evolving. So just want to put that timestamp there, depending on when you listen to this. Anything you'd like to say, Kristen, before we jump into our first topic?
No, I'm excited to be here. I think this is a super interesting topic. It's one of the areas where we get the most questions these days from clients and retailers. And so it's a treat to be able to dig into it.
Very good. All right, well, let's get into it. So why don't we start with the state of the market? You know, year to date, 2022, the S&P is down 18%. From the high to where we are now, Bitcoin is down 64% and Ethereum is down nearly 70%. This illustrates perfectly how volatile the crypto market can be and also why so many fear this space. However, despite current market conditions, I personally remain bullish in the space. I believe we're living in an early .com era all over again. And I brought some fun headlines that I thought would be good to pass by you that I found on the web. And I'd love to get your reaction on these, Kristen. So here are the two. In 1995, Newsweek released an article titled "Why the Internet Will Fail," and they predicted that the internet would die after 1996. The second one I thought was amusing was also in 1995, Wired released an article that said, "Most things that succeed don't require retraining 250 million people." So what crosses your mind when you hear that, Kristen? Does this remind you of anything we're hearing today when you think of NFTs?
Yeah, it does. Those types of quotes really do make me laugh. But I think it's really apt because the closest analog, in my opinion, to describe where we are right now with crypto is the .com crash, like Web 1.0, and all of the very heady kind of speculation that happened in the beginning. And then, of course, the crash, where a lot of those early experiments went down in balls of flames. But like, look at where we are now, right? I mean, the reason those quotes are so funny is because, you know, the web is completely integrated into our lives. We have retrained many more than 250 million people to use it, and it's become a utility. So I think that it's very important to keep in mind that it's super early days for anything related to NFTs, because there's just a lot of core questions and some technology wrinkles that still need to be worked out. But like you, I'm pretty bullish on some of the underlying technology. I think we just need to figure out how best to use it.
That's right. That's right. Well, I'd like to dig into the cornerstone of Web3, which I like to believe are NFTs. But before we go too deep, I think it's probably important to get some of the fundamentals out of the way. So Kristen, why don't you let us know how you would answer the question when somebody says, what is an NFT?
Well, so I think it's really important to just kind of keep it simple when it comes to trying to describe an NFT, because there's lots of business written about it. But at its most basic level, an NFT, so NFT stands for non-fungible token, and that is a unique digital asset that is secured on the blockchain, which is kind of database. So basically, an NFT is a special digital token that allows a buyer to say that they own a piece of work connected to that token. So that, and that what that is, what it's connected to could take many different forms. It could be art, it could be a collectible, it could be an experience, it could be a combination of those things. Like what it gets attached to an NFT is very interesting. But the NFT itself is just a digital token that is unique, that says I own the thing that is connected to this token. You know, the digital environment is not about scarcity, right? The digital environment is about, you know, how quickly can we replicate information all over the world. Yeah. But what makes an NFT really special is that it does ideally create scarcity in a digital environment. So a digital certificate of ownership can't be forged. Mm-hmm. And that's because that blockchain database that I just mentioned is structured so that your ownership is registered in lots of computers, lots of ledgers all over the world. It's not a single database, it's distributed.
Yeah.
So that means it's extremely difficult to forge. And it also, the non-fungible piece of that fungibility means exchangeability. So if something is non-fungible, it means that no two NFTs can be the same. So it does create that uniqueness. I think there are a couple of other things that I think are important to understand about NFTs. So the first is that typically NFTs are written in a particular type of cryptocurrency. At least this is the way it works right now. The most common one is Ethereum. But it does mean that NFTs are linked right now to the crypto market. So what is happening in cryptocurrencies is impacts NFTs, and that's one of the difficulties right now when we look at the early days of NFTs. Is it's tied into crypto, and crypto is struggling a little bit right now.
Yeah.
But the other thing to know is that the way it works is that in the coding of an NFT, there's something called a smart contract. That's actually what makes it exchangeable or sellable. And this smart contract lives in the code of the NFT, and that smart contract executes itself, which is really just fancy speak for meaning that all of the terms of ownership and of reselling and of copyright for that work that's attached to NFT are built right into the code of the NFT. So it means that the NFTs can be traded and the contracts can be executed digitally without a lot of back and forth or manual work. And that is going to be really important when we get around to talking about things like finance, which we're going to touch on a little bit later in this conversation.
Very, very well said. And I think now that we have the mechanics down of NFTs, I'd like to get into the shapes of NFTs, right? We discussed that we would discuss some of the interesting things we've seen in the space. So why don't you tell me about what project dynamics have caught your eye? And then I'll share one that I'm a big fan of as well.
Yeah, so when we were prepping for this, we talked about, when we were trying to figure out how to approach these NFTs, we started talking about them as the shapes that they're taking or the forms that they're taking, because right now, a lot of the news around NFTs is about this flashy project or that flashy story or this famous person. And actually, I think it's really important with NFTs to look beyond the form and kind of whatever's in the headlines right now, to think about structurally, like what this technology might do, what form might it take in the future, what kind of shapes are these projects looking like. So the first thing, and I think the one that is a lot of people think about when they think about NFTs is the intellectual property rights, so the ownership of a piece of intellectual property. So a lot of what has happened in the early days is NFTs attached to digital artwork, NFTs attached to things like avatars, or attached to assets in a video game, right? So I can own an NFT sword in one video game, and in a theoretical world, I can resell that to somebody else. I own this sword and I can sell this sword to another player. So this idea that you can use this digital token to own a unique piece of intellectual property in a digital world, I think that's the first thing that I think is very interesting about this.
Yeah. One of my favorites, and I believe it's crucial in almost all projects and engagements. All projects are using this, is engagement and community. Similar to how forums and Facebook groups have allowed like-minded individuals to come together, NFTs are creating literally hubs of people who like the same sports, TV shows, movies, same jokes, influencers, brands. I mean, it's an endless list. The only difference is that NFTs have now started to allow levels of engagement that have never been, seen, that otherwise would have been out of reach. It's like a fan club 2.0. I can confidently say that most of today's successful projects that have made it from 2020 till now have put a lot of effort into ensuring they execute on engagement and community, literally hiring personnel full time to do these type of roles. And I think this is what's allowing a lot of the projects entering the space to see the power of NFTs, because it's almost creating an ecosystem of loyalty, and at the same time creating royalties for the projects that are coming out, because some of the mechanics behind how NFTs work and generate revenue is through royalties that are also connected to projects forever. So the more and more that they switch hands and exchange from user to user, it benefits the brand or the IP or whatever the type of project is. But I think this one is one of the biggest ones that plays a role even in how I engage in NFTs. I take a look at the level of engagement that the projects have within the community, but also from the actual project leaders and what type of engagement they create for holders of these NFTs.
That's pretty interesting. That makes me think about another shape that I'm really interested in, which is just the idea of content exclusivity and VIP access, right? So what we're seeing is a lot of luxury brands are using NFTs to create a kind of, in the way that they have luxury goods in the real world, sort of NFT luxury goods that are exclusive. And so exclusive either by their price point or exclusive in that you're a member of a VIP group. And I think that it's related to what you were talking about with engagement. It's this idea that you can use an NFT to create a velvet rope, basically, to create a community, and also to drive things like very high-end collectibles in the digital space that are tied to the idea of exclusivity or luxury or high design or whatever. And I think it remains to be seen whether or not that ultimately, in my opinion, is the best use for NFTs. I think that feels to me like, again, a very very splashy but not super deep use of NFTs. But, for the people who engage in this type of brand ownership, there's a lot of money being exchanged and it feels special to them. So that is interesting to me.
Yeah, one that crosses my mind as we think of, it's still to be seen how it's going to be received, but I'm really excited to see how this takes off. It's fairly new to the space, is NFT projects that are almost coming at it as like a modern day country club. By owning the NFT, you're part of that country club. That club could be specific to one sport. It could be open to all sports. Ownership of that NFT, though, allows you to attend exclusive events, sporting events, get into raffles for major sporting events. Think more like Super Bowl, World Cup, things like major events like that, in real life meetups with athletes, and so much more. These type of NFTs, appeal to sporting fans, but they also attract non-sporting fans through creative collaborations with other brands and IPs. This one definitely, like I mentioned, is one of the newer ones to the space, but it's really hit the ground running and it's creating a lot of buzz. I'm very curious to see what else, the projects that are entering this sporting type event, or I should refer to it more as like a live entertainment project, are going to do in the space. But so far, it's been really fun to be a part of. Full transparency, I have been part of some, and I've been able to enjoy some of the real life experiences. So just being able to see on what they can execute, and then on top of that, layering on that engagement and community aspect where you get to network as well with like-minded people. These type of projects are, really piquing my interest.
Before we move on from sporting experiences, there's a couple things that reminds me of that I want to make sure I mention. I do agree that I feel like sports teams and the licensed teams around sports teams have been one of the earliest and also most successful groups in understanding this type of engagement. And also they understand licensing in a way that other groups don't, which I think gives them a leg up in this space. So for instance, for sure, we're already seeing NFT collectible baseball, football, basketball cards, which is, that's the analog to the old paper collectible, but the sports teams have been really doing great with those. And those NFTs seem to be holding their value. And then also they are minting NFTs for moments in sports, like literally the moment that Michael Jordan dunked a ball on this date, that video clip, they're making NFTs out of those. And then people can buy the primary intellectual property rights to that moment on video, right? So just really interesting. And I think the sports teams, if you want to look at a group that really understands NFTs, like that is a really great, they're showing a lot of leadership in this area. The last area, the last shape, or area that I'm most interested in, I think probably if I had to pick any of these in terms of the future, has to do with decentralized finance and how NFTs are being used in early days and what their potential is in terms of like how they could impact how we do business in the future. So some examples, one of the things that I've been really interested in is how NFTs might intersect with crowdfunding. So, we had an author in the book space that raised about $64 million last year for a new book project. And it was done, this is not an NFT project, this is just a normal Kickstarter, but he raised a lot of money off a humongous fan base. He's got a very engaged fan base. Yeah. And that made me start to think about, well, what would happen if a fan base came together and they didn't just back a project, but they actually bought a project? So for instance, imagine a group of fans coming together to buy a sports team, or a group of fans coming together to buy a music catalog, right? Rather than, a major music company buying it, why couldn't a fan base buy it? And then, license that and monetize it under a business structure. So that is really interesting to me, like taking the next step forward for fanship and making it actually asset driven. Basically, NFTs could create a shareholding structure for fans to come together, although they would have to develop a business structure for that because it isn't protected, right? Most of the rules around businesses don't apply to NFTs because it's so early.
Yeah.
And then the other really interesting stories that I've been following with NFTs have to do with how financial institutions are already using NFTs internally. So I saw a story when I was researching this that JP Morgan is already using an internal NFT structure to speed up trades within the company. So because they execute on a smart contract, you can do all of the transactions digitally without having any traders involved. And that is actually giving them an edge because, of course, in financial markets, speed is key. So that has nothing to do with crypto. That's an internal NFT that they're using, but they're using it to speed up their backend processes. Yeah. And we've seen other examples in finance of institutions trying to figure out whether or not they can transition futures trading, for instance, to NFTs for the same reason. It will make it much faster. And the volatility that we see in the crypto market just doesn't apply in these situations because they're within financial institutions where this is happening. So I think, though, the big question down the road, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about this next, is there are things that NFTs are really good at, and there are things that NFTs are really not good at. And that is, I think, really important as we think about how these are going to be used in the future.
Yeah, no, and that's a perfect segue. I will say I have not come across that article myself yet, so it's fascinating to hear that the technology is being used from the smart contracts. It's one step forward in the right direction. All right, well, let's get into our next area, which is challenges and obstacles. Now, I think the biggest one that I see, in my opinion, from wanting to introduce this space to so many people is always the friction to even enter the space, right? Even in this summary that I'm about to give, you're going to see there's just so many steps, right? You have to download a plugin on your computer to have a digital wallet. You have to create a digital wallet. You have to securely take the seed phrase that it gives you so that that's kind of like your PIN code that you never give the same way with like a debit card, right? Then you have to go into some sort of crypto exchange. You need to purchase that crypto. Well, first you'd have to transfer assets, USD, into the crypto exchange, buy the crypto, and then transfer it into MetaMask, and then connect to one of these marketplaces where they sell NFTs, and then buy the NFT, right? And like, just look at how many steps I've layered there. And the thing is, you can do these in different orders all the time, and there's just so much room for error there that I think until we find a way that these marketplaces allow you to use your debit card and purchase this NFT straight up, that's going to really help adopt this technology. And we're starting to see it. certain marketplaces are already introducing payment with card, but it's not universal across all projects. And therefore, it's still limited. So I think that's one of my biggest pet peeves, that I think it's pretty clear to me that until we're able to knock a lot of these barriers down, it's going to be difficult for mass adoption to happen.
Yeah, I mean, when I hear you talk about that process, and I think about someone who's listening to us who has absolutely no idea what it is that you just said. Yeah. And and the fact that 85% of people in the surveys that we've run internally have not played with crypto in any way. So like 85% of the US population is not participating in this already. That is just like one mountain too high to climb for most people, right? So just that basic friction. And then there's other things about it that I think also, I think a lot of the discussions that I'm hearing right now have to do with the fact that the technology has challenges like this. So for instance, that the code that you mentioned, like if you lose that code, or if you lose the code to your wallet, it's like a super, it's analog process. You can't access your money. And there are lots of stories about people losing their crypto because they lose their access to their wallet. You literally can't get at your money. So there's no backup. And then the other thing about it is that, excuse me, crypto is, like I said, it's really good at certain things. So that idea of speeding up transactions with smart contracts, that's super interesting, I think, and very feels new. But there are other things with crypto that are going to make it difficult to live up to some of the promises that have been, that early adopters have been talking about, like for instance, revolutionizing a global currency, right? Because crypto is 100%, it's not 100% transparent in that it doesn't say Alex owns this piece of crypto, but it does say user XXXXXXX owns this piece of crypto or this NFT and sold it to this other user on this date. Because the blockchain is distributed, your sales transaction is recorded on every computer that's running that blockchain around the world. And it's a completely transparent transaction. So anyone can go in and look at those transactions, which means that it's not very good for privacy. It's not very good for things like money laundering or even just but protecting anonymous transactions. And, if people have talked about getting to the point where you can like Venmo somebody in crypto, well, if you've got someone who's looking for you and we get to a point where you're Venmoing someone in crypto, someone will theoretically be able to see that I Venmoed my husband via crypto. And not only that, but where I was at the time that I did that, like that's not awesome for privacy. Yeah. So I think those are pretty big challenges to overcome. And the question of, I think as we continue to evolve this, the interesting thing will be to see how we work out what it is great for and how we work out what it's not great for. I'm pretty confident though that we're going to solve a lot of the early technical issues that people raise. So for instance, it was just announced earlier this week that Ethereum are going to be moving from proof of work to proof of stake. Yeah. Am I right about that? That's the right direction, right?
Yep.
Proof of work to proof of stake. So proof of work requires tremendous computing power to record all of the transactions on the blockchain, and that creates a tremendous energy draw, which has given up until this point crypto transactions a terrible reputation environmentally. So moving from proof of work to proof of stake, which is an alternate way of recording the transactions that I think reduces energy use by like 99%, is going to solve some of the environmental issues that people raise around crypto. So I'm confident that we will work on these technologies. And I think, like what you said, that we will figure out the payment process to make it smoother, it's more scalable in the future. So I think the question is just what could this be? Where is it going? Like what are people going to want, and are they going to want the types of things that are being packaged around NFTs right now? I'm not sure, but I think it's a really interesting question.
Yeah, and I'm sure we can make this conversation an entire 2-hour session and explore so many different avenues. But I think this is a concise amount of information that we've put out to the public. We've touched on some key important items in the space. And I think this is probably a good place to stop, and we can, let the audience know if there's any questions, anything that we sparked your interest in. We're always here. Feel free to reach out to us. We're just an email away, a phone call away. Kristen, why don't you take us home?
Yeah, so what I would say to all the people who are listening to this is we haven't really touched on the specifics of how NFTs might be used in any of the types of practices and goods that we work in here at NFTs. So if you have specific questions about how NFTs are being used in beauty, or how NFTs could be used in books or games or toys, like if you want to really dig into the detail of your sector, please just reach out to us, because we would be happy to talk about that. Like Alex said, like we could keep going on this one for hours probably. So this is just a kind of wet your whistle type of podcast, but we are really interested in this. Our thought leadership group is tracking it very closely. So we invite your questions, and would be happy to discuss further. But in the meantime, thanks, Alex. It's been a really interesting conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.